Nobody in the Ironvale pack paid much attention to Lena Ashvail. She was quiet, not because she was shy, but because she had never been able to speak. Not a single word in all of her 22 years. She was born that way, and the pack had long ago decided what that meant. That she was weak, small, and easy to overlook. She carried water before dawn. She mended torn clothing when others slept. She did her work without complaint, and asked for nothing in return. The other wolves walked past her in the corridors, as if she were part of the wall. Lena did not spend her energy being angry about this. She had learned, somewhere along the way, to watch instead. And because she was always watching, she noticed things others missed. The way a storm changed the smell of the air 2 hours before it arrived. The way certain elders glanced at each other when they thought no one was looking. The way the old forest at the edge of pack territory seemed to breathe at night, slow and deep, like something enormous, sleeping under the roots. She had felt it her whole life, a low hum, like a second heartbeat, coming from the direction of Ash Hollow. She never told anyone. There was no one to tell, and no way to say it even if there were. Then came the day of the Great Gathering, and everything began to change. The Great Gathering was held once every 3 years. Every pack leader in the 7 territories came, along with hundreds of wolves from all ranks. It was a time for agreements, for alliances, and sometimes, when the moon was right, for the recognition of fated mate bonds. Lena had not planned to attend. She had no reason to, but a young messenger found her that morning, carrying a formal summons with the Alpha King's seal pressed into the wax. She stared at it for a long moment, before folding it carefully into her coat pocket. She arrived at the hall just as the evening ceremony was beginning. Torchlight filled the great stone room. 300 wolves stood in quiet rows. At the front, on a raised platform, stood Alpha King Darien Voss. He was exactly what people said he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved for the purpose of giving commands. His dark eyes swept the room with the calm authority of someone who had never once doubted his right to lead. Beside him stood Alpha Serena Crow, the leader of the Eastern Mountain Pack, poised and sharp, watching the crowd with cool intelligence. Lena found a place near the back and kept still. She did not understand why she had been summoned. Then Darien's eyes moved across the room and stopped, directly on her face. She felt it the moment their eyes met. Something pulled in her chest, deep and certain, like a rope drawing tight. She had read about fated mate bonds in her grandmother's old books. She had never thought it would happen to her. From the way his jaw tightened, she knew he felt it too. For 3 seconds, no one in the room moved. Then Darien Voss stepped forward, and in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, he spoke the formal words of rejection. He was precise. He was thorough. He completed every part of the old rite without hesitation, sealing each thread of the bond with cold, careful words. He did not look at her face while he did it. When it was finished, he stepped back and returned his eyes to Serena Crow, as if nothing had happened. 300 wolves stared at Lena. She stood very still. She breathed slowly. She did not reach for him. She did not make a sound, though that, of course, she never could. When the silence stretched long enough that it became uncomfortable for everyone else in the room, she turned and walked back through the crowd, which parted for her in awkward, wordless discomfort. She did not run. She walked at the same pace she always did, through the great doors, into the cold night air, across the stone courtyard, and back toward the lower part of the settlement, where her small room waited. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, looking at the wall. Something had cracked inside her. She could not name it and could not speak it, but she felt it. A fracture, deep and quiet, running through the center of her chest. The days that followed were ordinary, which somehow made everything worse. Lena returned to her work. She carried the water. She mended the clothing. She moved through the pack's daily life like a shadow, and the other wolves looked at her with a new kind of pity that she liked even less than the old kind of indifference. Darien Voss, she heard through fragments of overheard conversation, was completing his alliance with Serena Crow's pack. There was talk of a formal bonding ceremony in the spring. The eastern mountain passes would open to Ironvale traders. Everyone agreed it was a wise decision. Everyone agreed the Alpha King had acted correctly. Nobody asked Lena what she thought. At night, the pull toward Ash Hollow grew stronger. She began waking before midnight, drawn to the window. her eyes moving automatically toward the dark line of trees at the territory's edge. Pack law forbade entry to the hollow. It had been forbidden for generations, for reasons no one clearly remembered anymore, though the oldest elders spoke about it with a particular kind of careful quiet that suggested the reasons were serious. On the third night, Lena stopped resisting. She dressed in the dark and walked out of the settlement, through the gate that was left unguarded after midnight, across the open meadow, and into the ash hollow without stopping. The trees were enormous and old, their roots rising from the earth in great arching knots. Pale lichen covered the bark. The ground was soft under her boots, and faintly, impossibly, warm, despite the cold of the night around her. She walked deeper than she had ever gone. The low hum grew stronger with every step, no longer in the distance but directly beneath her feet, rising up through her boots, through her legs, into her chest, where the fracture from 3 nights ago waited. She found the clearing without searching for it. It appeared between 2 ancient trees, like a room that had been waiting for her. At its center, half buried in the earth, was a circle of stones, covered in carvings she recognized from the last pages of her grandmother's journal. Symbols she had spent years trying to decode, never quite managing to crack the meaning. Her hands moved to the nearest stone before she decided to reach for it. Her fingers traced the carved lines. Beneath her palm, the stone was warm. The ground trembled, very gently, not like an earthquake, but like a breath, like something waking up. What happened next was not a plan. It was not a ceremony. It was not a decision made with a clear head in a calm moment. It was 3 nights of carrying a rejection that no one had asked if she was able to bear. It was 22 years of silence, not peaceful silence, not chosen silence, but the silence of someone who had been told, in 100 small ways, that what she carried inside her did not matter enough to hear. It was the fracture in her chest, finally breaking all the way open. Lena tilted her head back, and for the first time in her life, her throat opened. The sound that came out was not a scream, it was a howl, ancient and clear, resonating at a frequency that had nothing to do with volume, and everything to do with depth. It shook the oldest roots of the ash hollow. It moved through the earth like a wave. It traveled outward across every pack territory at the same moment, not as a sound that could be heard with ears, but as a vibration felt in the bones of every wolf for 100 miles in every direction. In the northern ranges, where the stone mountains met the frozen sky, something shifted inside the rock and opened its eyes. In the eastern sea cliffs, something rose from the deep water, enormous and ancient, shaking salt from its fur. In the shadow valleys, the storm-torn peaks, the bone-quiet burial plains, the deep star-dark forests, 6 more presences stirred, stretched, and turned toward the sound of the one who had called them. The ancient guardian wolves, 7 in total, dormant for 300 years, had heard their caller. They came. They did not arrive quietly. The earth wolf rose from the ground at the edge of the clearing, pulling itself free of the soil, the way a tree might pull its roots up and walk. It was the size of a small building. The ground around it cracked and shifted. Moss and stone fell from its back as it shook itself slowly. And when it shook, the trees at the edge of the clearing swayed as if hit by a strong wind. The storm wolf came from the sky in a column of lightning. It landed without a sound, despite its size, and when it settled, the air around it crackled faintly with electricity, causing Lena's hair to lift. The others came from the water, from the shadows, from the dark between stars. Each one was different. Each one carried its element the way a living creature carries its nature, not as a tool, but as a self. They circled Lena, 7 enormous wolves, moving around the clearing in a slow, measured ring, their eyes, each a different color, each glowing faintly, fixed on her face. Then, one by one, they lowered their heads. Lena had lived her entire life without a single person bowing to her, without a single wolf treating her as anything more than background. She stood very still, her hands at her sides, and looked at each of them in turn. Then she stepped forward and placed her palm gently on the muzzle of the earth wolf. Something passed between them, recognition, old and certain, running through her hand like a current. The earth wolf exhaled slowly, its warm breath moving her hair. The ground steadied under her feet. She understood, in that moment, what her grandmother had been trying to protect her from knowing too soon. She was the last of a line that stretched back further than the pack system, further than the Alpha King title, further than any of the agreements and hierarchies that had shaped the world she had grown up in. She was the guardian caller, the only bloodline that could summon and bond with the ancient wolves. Her grandmother had sealed her voice at birth not as punishment, but as protection, because people who knew what Lena was had a history of trying to control her, or worse. The silence had been a shield. And now, at last, she did not need it anymore. Every alpha in every territory felt the pulse at the same moment. It moved through the pack bonds like a wave through still water, not violent, but impossible to ignore. Wolves set down their cups mid-conversation. Leaders stopped mid-sentence in strategy meetings. Even those asleep woke, without knowing why, sitting up with the certain feeling that something large and old had just changed. Darian Voss grabbed the edge of the table in the middle of his council meeting. His beta, Corin, watched the color drain from the Alpha King's face and said nothing, because he had felt it too. The bond Darian had formally rejected, the one that by every rule of pack law should have dissolved within hours, flooded back open with something enormous traveling along it. Not pain, not anger, something far more humbling than either of those. Darian stood up without speaking, walked out of the room, and kept walking. He arrived at the Ash Hollow boundary before dawn. The 7 ancient guardian wolves were visible from the tree line, moving in slow circles around a clearing he could not see into from where he stood. 3 of his guards had already retreated back to the settlement without being asked to. The 4th stood beside him, looking at the enormous shapes in the distant firelight with wide, careful eyes. Darian told the 4th guard to go home too, then he walked in alone. The guardian wolves allowed him through the circle. He walked to the center and found Lena sitting on the carved stone, completely calm, the largest of the wolves curled behind her like a hill. She looked up at him. Her expression was not angry, it was not cold. It was simply clear, the way a person looks when they have nothing left to hide, and have decided they do not owe anyone a performance of how they feel. He sat down across from her on the cold ground. The earth between them was warm. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, simply and without preparation, "I was wrong." They were the 3 most honest words he had spoken in years. No political framing, no calculated delivery, just the plain truth, offered without a guarantee of what it would cost him. Lena looked at him for a long time, then she reached into her coat, took out her grandmother's journal, and placed it on the ground between them. She met his eyes and signed. One deliberate gesture, slow and clear. Read. He read through the night. The journal told a story that went back 3 centuries. The guardian caller and the Alpha King of that era had also been fated mates. When that Alpha King rejected his caller for political reasons, to secure an alliance with the Western Coast packs, the ancient guardian wolves had gone dormant. The bond that held them stable was not just personal, it was structural. Without it, the ancient balance that the guardians maintained across pack territories had been slowly unwinding for 300 years, like a knot coming loose one fiber at a time. The strange weather patterns, the unexplained failures of pack bonds in the outer territories, the growing tension between packs that could never be fully resolved, no matter how many agreements were signed. The elders had been managing the symptoms for 3 centuries without knowing the cause. The cause was sitting on the cold ground in front of him, in the form of a woman who had never spoken a word and had spent her life being treated as if she barely mattered. He set the journal down. He sat with what he had read for a long time. Then he looked at her and said, "Your grandmother sealed your voice to keep you alive, until you were strong enough to survive being known." Lena did not nod. She simply held his gaze. He was correct. He did not need her confirmation. "I don't know how to fix what I did," he said. "I know how to undo the ceremony. I don't know how to undo what it felt like to stand in that hall and say those words in front of 300 people." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she picked up a small stick from the ground and wrote 3 words in the soft earth between them. "I know." She did not say yes that night. This was important. She walked back to the settlement at dawn, the earth wolf following at the tree line until she crossed the boundary of the hollow. She spent 3 more days in her ordinary life, doing her ordinary work, thinking without rushing. The other wolves watched her differently now, not with pity. with something closer to careful respect, which was new and took some getting used to. On the fourth day, she walked back to where Darian was waiting, not in the hollow, but at the edge of it, where he had come every morning, and stood without demanding anything, and she placed her hand flat against his chest. It was the old gesture. Every wolf in every pack knew it. A chosen bond, offered freely. His hand came up and covered hers, and he said nothing. In the silence, which had never frightened Lena, everything that needed to be understood was understood. The ancient guardian wolves did not leave. They settled, one by one, across the 7 territories, each choosing the land that matched its nature, beginning a new era that the old texts had described only as a distant possibility. Pack leaders woke each morning to find enormous, ancient creatures moving through their hills and valleys with quiet authority, steadying things that had been slowly loosening for generations. Lena's voice did not come back all at once. That was not how it worked. But in the weeks that followed, small sounds began to find their way up and out. A hum while she worked, a soft syllable here and there, her throat slowly remembering that it had always been allowed to speak. No one made a great ceremony of it. She did not need them to. She had already said the most important thing she would ever say. She had said it without a single word, in the middle of an ancient forest, at the end of a long silence, and it had woken up every sleeping guardian in the world.